Welcome everyone for this VLSI design lecture series. In today's lecture video, I'll be discussing about stick diagrams. As the fabrication process becomes more and more complicated, it is very much essential for the design engineers to understand very minute details of fabrication process. One such method is drawing stick diagram. In this, a design engineer draws a colored representation of various layers which is used in fabrication process, such as N-type diffusion, P-type diffusion, metal, polysilicon, etc. The main advantage of using stick diagram is the design engineer need not to worry about the design rules. There are certain color codes which are used in stick diagrams, which is shown in this particular diagram. N diffusion is represented by green color, and the pattern we can use is a green rectangular box or a stick, green stick. Similarly, P diffusion is represented by yellow color, which is represented by yellow stick. Polysilicon is represented by red color, which is represented by red stick. Metal 1, which is widely used for connection purpose, is represented by blue color, which is represented by using blue stick. Metal 2, which is not very much widely used for drawing stick diagrams, is represented using magenta color, and a pattern we'll be using a stick of color magenta. Contacts and taps is represented by black color, and it is represented by either a square box or a circular dot. Whenever two different layers meet in stick diagram, if at all electrical connection has to be established, we place something called as contact. If contact is not placed between two layers, two different layers, then electrical connection is not established. Now let us see how to represent this MOSFET using color code. A MOSFET is formed when polysilicon crosses diffusion. When polysilicon layer crosses P-type diffusion, we get PMOS transistor, which is as shown in this particular representation. Yellow color represents P-type diffusion, and when this yellow or diffusion is crossed, the P-type diffusion is crossed with polysilicon, it is represented by red color, we get PMOS transistor. Similarly, when polysilicon layer crosses N-type diffusion, NMOS transistor is formed. N-type diffusion is represented by green color, and when this N-type diffusion is crossed by polysilicon, we get NMOS transistor. Now let us see how this NMOS and PMOS is represented in stick diagram. NMOS transistor, PMOS transistor is represented, is shown in this particular figure towards left hand side and right hand side respectively. N-type diffusion is represented by green color. When this N-type diffusion is crossed by polysilicon, we get NMOS transistor. The polysilicon terminal is always taken as the gate terminal. Left hand side to that gate terminal, we can either represent it as source terminal or we can represent it as drain terminal. Right hand side to that gate terminal, we can represent that terminal as either drain terminal or source terminal. It is left to us. Similarly, when P-type diffusion, which is represented by yellow color, is crossed by polysilicon, which is represented by red color, we get PMOS transistor. And even here, the gate terminal, the polysilicon terminal forms the gate of the PMOS transistor. Left hand side to it, we can represent either source or drain terminal. Right hand side we can represent right hand side to the gate, we can represent either drain or source terminal. It is left to us. So this is how we represent NMOS and PMOS transistor in stick diagram. Now let us take a basic example of CMOS inverter, and let us try to represent this CMOS inverter using stick diagram. As we already know, the circuit diagram representation of CMOS inverter, it consists of a PMOS transistor, which forms the pull-up network, NMOS transistor, which forms the pull-down network. And the gate terminal of PMOS transistor is connected to gate terminal of NMOS transistor, which is given as input. The source terminal of PMOS transistor is connected to VDD. The drain terminal of PMOS transistor is connected to drain terminal of NMOS transistor. The source terminal of NMOS transistor is connected to ground. The output is extracted where pull-up network and pull-down network meets. That is, the drain terminal of PMOS transistor and the drain terminal of NMOS transistor is meeting at a point. From there, we'll be extracting the output. So always when we are drawing a stick diagram for CMOS inverter, we represent this VDD line and ground line, which is logic high level and logic low level, by using metal. So in stick diagram form, this VDD and ground is represented by blue color line because we use metal. And sufficient space is given between these two layers, VDD layer as well as ground layer, so that in between we can implement PMOS transistor and NMOS transistor and connection can be given. And there is an imaginary line in between this VDD and ground, which is called as demarcation line. Above this demarcation line, we implement pull-up network, which consists of PMOS transistors. Below this demarcation line, we implement N-type MOSFETs, which forms pull-down network. PMOS transistor. To form PMOS transistor, first we have to implement a P-type diffusion. P-type diffusion is represented by yellow color. And bottom to this demarcation line, we have to represent NMOS transistor. N-type diffusion. For NMOS transistor, we need N-type diffusion. So this N-type diffusion is represented by green color stick. PMOS transistor is formed when P-type diffusion crosses polysilicon. NMOS transistor is formed when N-type diffusion crosses polysilicon. Polysilicon is represented by red color. Now let us see the terminals. As per the circuit diagram, I have written the terminals. Polysilicon forms the gate terminal. Left hand side toward, I have written source. In the right hand side to that, I have written drain as per our circuit diagram. Same way for NMOS transistor, we have gate, drain as well as source terminal. It is as per the circuit diagram. After forming transistors, PMOS as well as NMOS, two type of MOSFETs are formed. After this, we have to give connections. Gate terminal of PMOS transistor is connected to gate terminal of NMOS transistor and it is given as input. The same thing we have done here. Gate of PMOS transistor is connected to gate of NMOS transistor and it is given as input. Next. The source terminal of PMOS transistor is connected to VDD. The same connection is given. Source terminal is connected to VDD and the connection I've given using metal. Next. Source terminal of NMOS transistor is connected to ground. The same thing is being connected. Source terminal of NMOS transistor is connected to ground and I've represented using a metallic stick. Next. Drain terminal of PMOS transistor is connected to drain terminal of NMOS transistor, which in turn is given as output. Drain and drain of PMOS and NMOS is shorted and it is given as output. Next. When we were discussing about the color codes, I told you about the contacts. Contacts will always be formed when two different layers meet and there has to be an electrical connection which has to be established. So whenever two different layers meet and there has to be an electrical connection, we establish something called as contact. So let us establish contacts here. The metal and the diffusion, two different layers, there has to be electrical connection between those two. So we have to establish a contact. It is also called as VIA. Similarly, diffusion, metal, two different layers. So we have to establish a contact. Metal, diffusion, P-type, N-type diffusion, metal, N-type diffusion, we have to establish a contact. Similarly, diffusion, N-type diffusion, and there is a metal here. If there has to be connection, we have to establish a contact. So this is how we represent CMOS inverter using stick diagram. And one more important thing is this input terminal is connected using polysilicon. We can also using metal layer for input terminal as we have connected. Here we have connected output terminal with respect to metal layer. VDD is connected using metal layer. Ground is connected with respect to metal layer. Similarly, we can connect input terminal with respect to metal layer as well. So if we are using metal layer, we use input one more layer here called as metal layer, and polysilicon and this metal layer will be infused with one more contact. That's the only difference which we have to do. But normally for gate inputs, we stop at this polysilicon. We will not normally will not connect metal. Even if we connect metal, it is not wrong. I hope that you have understood the stick diagram representation of inverter. Thank you.